Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Board of Education's I Believe award presentation. Ordinarily, President White would start our meeting and introduce me to in turn introduce our awardee, but he's having audio problems, so I'm going to launch right into it. I'm Willa Powell. I am the commissioner on the Board of Education who is the liaison to School Without Walls. And in that capacity, it is my honor to introduce to you our I Believe award winning student, Andre De Jesus. The Rochester Board of Education is proud to present the I Believe Award to School Without Walls student Andre De Jesus and the teaching staff, and I'm going to list them all: Sue Hollister Kronberger, Kelly Johnson, Ashley Ladigas, Mike Montesano, Kari Shaw, Holly Taylor, and Lita Williams. All of these teachers were named by our student, Andre De Jesus, as critical to his turnaround success. Despite the challenges of remote learning due to COVID-19, Andre has been able to make a remarkable turnaround where his attendance and academics have significantly improved. We applaud the teaching staff that have been instrumental in providing outstanding student support to Andre's academic success. Please join me in congratulating Andre De Jesus and his teachers. At this time, I would like to give Andre an opportunity to make some remarks. In particular, Andre, I'd like to hear you tell us what made the biggest difference to you in turning around your attitude towards school, attendance, and academics. This is being given to you because you've made a remarkable turnaround, and I think the entire district wants to know what success. The floor is yours, Mr.
Okay, I would like to thank all my teachers. Yes, they have had a big impact on my turnaround. Yes, and it's been difficult. Yes, because at first I was like losing motivation because of the absences and how I wasn't really attending and wasn't doing my work. But they the more the teachers was impacting with me, it made me it inspired me to overcome that and go to make sure I wake up to go to class every day to better myself and to sit in class. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your remarks. And yes, I think there's a button on our Zoom screen that lets us applaud you and give you celebratory remarks and so on. So is there any one particular teacher that would like to kick us off with some insights as to Andre's spirit of overcoming adversity, what they found particularly helpful in this COVID environment to students?
I'll speak. I have seen tremendous growth in Andre. I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of his commitment to actually do the work in this virtual setting. His attendance has skyrocketed, and not just his attendance, the quality of his work. I am so proud of him. I'm always telling him, I'm like, oh, you rocking it, you killing it, you making it happen, and you making it rain. He has just been so impressive in this virtual setting with all the challenges that we are facing. I am so proud of you, Andre.
Kari, your mic is hot. Would you like to say a word?
For me, I am just impressed with his ability to come to class on time, considering the challenges that he has faced, and not only come to class, but also produce, ask clarifying questions, advocate for himself. He is not afraid to meet with me one-on-one to get the additional support. And what I'm most impressed with is that he probably missed the first half of first marking period. And by the second half, he made up all his work. Oh, I am so sorry. My light went off. He made up all his work, and I don't know why my light went off. I'm sorry. He made up all his work, and I was just impressed with how well he performed both on assessment task and class task. So, and I am happy to be his teacher. He is a remarkable young man.
I'll say a couple of things about Andre. I have him at SEL and for PE. You know, this is a challenging time for all of us, especially for PE, because we're not as active in a setting that we're used to. But I love it how he'll always catch himself and he'll say, "Oh, I miss PE, or I missed that workout, Mike, and I got to get to that workout that you provided." And he just at 8:30 in the morning, I always look for Andre because he keeps the conversation going for SEL. So I appreciate that, and I know he's worked very hard to get back on track. So great job, Andre.
I'm just going to quickly jump in. Obviously, I don't teach Andre in class, but I am the principal. And I have to say, I am extremely proud of the progress that Andre has made. And I'm extremely proud of the team of teachers that have supported him and worked with him. And I couldn't be more pleased with all the efforts that everyone has made. And it just highlights the importance of relationships between, teachers and students, as well as relationships between students, because Andre has even relied on some of his peers for support and extra help. And some students are not willing to always do that because they'll feel kind of shy and admitting that they don't know something. But he has not done that. He has willingly accepted assistance from whoever has been there to offer it. So I just want to say I am proud of you, Andre. I'm proud of you, teachers, and very happy to be the principal at this school with such a wonderful, wonderful group of folks. So keep up the good work.
Commissioner Powell, can you guys hear me?
We can, Commissioner White, and the floor and the gap are yours.
Thank you very much. Hey, listen, thank you for covering for me for that brief moment. This technology doesn't always work the way you want it to, but people will work. People will fill in the gaps, fill in the holes, and make sure that things move forward. This evening is an example of that, but a better example is how Andre and the team of teachers and administrators have come together in this gaping hole we call COVID. It has really changed how we educate our students. I've just been told that my screen is sideways, and there's a reason behind that, but I'll explain that later. Thank you, Kalia. It has really created some real challenges. So Andre, I wanted to say to you on behalf of the board, and I don't know you, to be honest, from Adam or Eve, but as I'm sitting here listening to you, man, I am so proud of you. The entire Board of Education is so proud of you. You're talking about rising to the occasion and deciding on your own that you were going to do things differently, and then realizing that you couldn't do it by yourself or all alone, and that you had to rely on teachers and administrators, and then to have the wisdom and the courage and the humility to recognize those people tonight. Andre, you are a shining example of everybody who says, we can't do this during COVID. This is just too big of a gaping hole. It's too challenging. It's too difficult. Andre, man, you are our best example of how we can get through this thing we call COVID. You figured out what the challenge was externally and within yourself, and you moved. And you moved in a way that has you progressing, and in a way that I'm sure has you feeling proud about yourself. But I really want to reiterate, and I mean this from the heart, on behalf of the 7 board members, we celebrate you tonight because you're the reason why we took these jobs, to see students and there's the adults that are in their lives, their teachers, the cafeteria people, the custodians, the administrators, the paraprofessionals, who you have the wisdom to say, hey, you know what? I did turn this around, but I did it with the help of others. So Andre, Commissioner Powell pointed to the little emoji things where we applaud and celebrate. I don't know if you saw mine, but I did the hand clapping. I think somebody did the party celebration thing. It's that and much more, Andre. We are really proud of you, and the phrase, I believe, is no mistake. What that phrase refers to, Andre, is we believe in you. And just as important, it sounds to me like you believe in the adults that supported you and believed in you. So again, on behalf of the Board of Education, Andre, we're proud of you, man. Well done. Well done. All right, Kalia.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Okay, so we are moving swiftly into our swearing in ceremony. We thank you everyone for joining us. Congratulations again to all, to everyone. Thank you, Andre. Congratulations for all the hard work. Please keep it up. And thank you to all his teachers. We really want to encourage you to keep supporting him as he grows, as well as all of our other students. So my apologies, but we are going to move swiftly over to conference room 3A, where our general counsel is waiting with our new board commissioner for a swearing in ceremony. And we have sound on that.
All right. I see 2 familiar faces there. I see Bill Clark and Carl Christoph. For those who don't know, the jobs that we have as commissioners of education are we become officers of the state, and so we have to take an oath of office. Oh, and I should back up a little bit. As many of you know, we had a colleague of ours, Natalie Shepard, who was blessed to have another opportunity to serve in our community. That created a vacancy. That vacancy is being filled today by Bill Clark, William Clark, a former head of the Urban League of Rochester, a gentleman who is no stranger to the Rochester City School District, because for decades he has sought to support and move our students like Andre in a positive and a productive, successful direction. Today he gets sworn in to continue that good work. And on that note, I turn it over to our general counsel, Carl Christoph.
Okay, and the mic should be on for both of you, but I will need you to speak into the mics. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Clark, will you raise your right hand, please, and repeat after me? I, William Clark,
I, William Clark,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully
and that I will faithfully
discharge the duties of the office
discharge the duties of the office
of Rochester Board of Education Commissioner.
of Rochester Board of Education Commissioner.
Congratulations, Mr. Clark.
Thank you.
The obligatory elbow bump.
I'll ask you to officially sign your oath right there, please.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. And again,
Thank you.
congratulations, Mr. President. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christoph. Mr. Clark, I'll see you in the Zoom room in a few minutes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kalia, I understand we're going to take a brief recess before we convene our meeting at 6:30.
Correct. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Today is November the 19th, 2020. The time is 6:36. On behalf of the Board of Education, I hope your week is going well, and I hope you and your families are safe. And we truly appreciate you joining us tonight. We have a pretty full agenda, so we'll get right at it. The first thing that we do is we begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm in a situation right now where I don't have a flag, but I would encourage those who wish to join me to imagine in your mind either the flag or what you think it should stand for. And let's just recite the Pledge of Allegiance where we are standing or sitting. I'll lead in the pledge, if that's all right with you all. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thanks for joining me in that pledge. Next, we as a board always try to put on record the minutes of our prior meetings. And by minutes, I'm sure most of you know, that means handwritten or typed notes that record the prior discussions of prior meetings. Those minutes are available on this thing called Board Docs. Madam Clerk, are they available on our website as well?
Once they are adopted, they are available on the website, yes.
So anybody could go to www.rcsdk12.org, is that right?
That is correct. Yes. And so any persons who are able to access our website, rcsdk12.org, if you go to the board tab, there is a section there for Board of Education business meeting minutes, and there are also meeting minutes for special meetings as well.
The reason why I mentioned that to you all and asked our board clerk to identify where you could find them is at this portion of our meeting, all we do is I ask for a motion to approve those minutes. We don't go over them. Someone might have an issue about something that wasn't there or should have been there or should be taken out. But generally speaking, I get a motion and someone says, yeah, and the board votes on whether those minutes reflect the content of those prior meetings. And then we move on. But if you wanted to see what we actually talked about in any one of these meetings that I'm going to reference, any one of these dates, you could simply go, as the clerk just indicated, to our website and look at those minutes. Having said that, I need a motion from one of my colleagues to approve the minutes of the October 27th, 2020 meeting, the November 5th, 2020 meeting, the November 12th, 2020 meeting, and finally the November the 18th meeting, which was actually a public hearing. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams.
Mr. President, before
Yes,
you vote, I would like to have the board consider the following corrections to the November 12 minutes. The timeline in November 12 minutes isn't quite right. You as the president had already turned over the gavel to Commissioner LeBron prior to my remarks. Therefore, the order of events should read the first paragraph under Roman numeral 2 should end at the end of the first sentence. All of the second paragraph from Roman numeral 1 should become the second paragraph of Roman numeral 2. And the remainder of the opening paragraph of Roman numeral 3 should be the third paragraph. I've sent those revisions to the board clerk via email and to the board, the whole board as well. Second, I think that it's important that the record shows that Commissioner LeBron, having recognized me to speak, then interrupted me and refused to allow me to finish, forcing President White to restore order at State Monitor Jallo's request. Any viewing of the video court record would show that this is what happened, and I submit that this was as significant as an event as a board member having the meeting due to technical difficulties for a minute before returning, which is a fact that does show up in these minutes.
Commissioner Powell, I assume that is a motion to amend.
Yes, thank you.
Is there a second to that motion?
Seconded.
That motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor of amending the minutes as reflected by Commissioner Powell in her remarks indicate by saying aye. Make sure your video camera is on. Thanks. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Madam Clerk, have you recorded the votes?
My apologies. I had to step away really quickly for some technical difficulties. Can you please redo that section? I apologize.
What did you need reread?
I just needed the vote.
The vote? Okay, all
One
right.
more time.
So that's all right. All those in favor of amending the minutes as reflected by Commissioner Powell in her comments indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Madam Clerk, did you record the votes?
My apologies. I have only one person who said aye on screen just now.
Well, I know Commissioner Malloy said aye and I said aye.
Okay.
So that's two.
Thank you.
That's, so that's Vice President Elliott and Commissioner Powell.
Okay, Mr. Clark, are you voting on this matter?
Well,
Given the fact that I wasn't in attendance at the meetings, I do not feel comfortable voting on the issue. So I will either vote no or abstain.
You know, I was going to indicate, I had indicated to Mr. Clark, he and I spoke earlier today, he just had access to the documents, all the documents, because he wasn't a member of the board. So to be fair to him, he did not have an opportunity to review any of the materials. And I told him that at the appropriate time, I was thinking it was going to be at the point where we began to do resolutions, that at that point, I would explain to the community on behalf of Mr. Clark and the board that he has three choices. And my colleagues know this because we've been around for a while. He votes yes, no, or abstains. And as you all know, our rules do not allow a person to abstain other than for reasons relating to a financial conflict or something like that. I'm sure Mr. Christoph could provide a better explanation. But those are his only three options. So Mr. Clark and I did talk in advance, and I said to him at that point, which I thought was going to be resolutions, I would explain to the community that he's likely to vote no, not because he doesn't support a particular initiative, but we wouldn't want him to vote on materials that he just has not had access to until just actually today. So his only recourse on these minutes, because he wasn't at the meeting and because he just saw the documents relating to the meeting minutes, would be to vote no, because he can't vote, he can't abstain. And why would he vote yes if he wasn't at the meeting? So I did the explanation a little bit earlier than I thought, but I do want you all, and I did say to Mr. Clark, who was very concerned and rightly so about his votes, that people need to understand he will be voting no, because why would he vote yes on stuff that he didn't have access to? So I'm sure he's going to be voting quite a bit in the future, but not tonight. At least that's what he
President, if I might.
Yes, Mr. Christoph.
Under the circumstances present, especially with respect to the newness of Mr. Clark on the board and his inability to review any of the materials in advance, it would be okay for him to abstain under those circumstances. And he may also, and he and I also had a discussion prior to the meeting, and he may also, if he wishes and feels sufficiently comfortable with the materials that he has had the opportunity to review during the meeting, and after hearing the discussion of his colleagues on the board, he may very well choose to vote either in the affirmative or the negative on the merits.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Christoph, for that clarification. But I just want to be clear, because I did tell him this, and I didn't want to give him the bad advice. Normally, the only circumstance under which you can abstain is if there are financial reasons. Is that right, or did I advise him incorrectly? I'm not talking about tonight. I think you provide an explanation, but I thought the rule was you could not just say, I abstain. I remember a former commissioner who's no longer on the board. She repeatedly tried to do that. And I thought it was you who corrected her, and others said, you can't do that. Is that right? You're muted.
I believe that in the not too recent past, we did amend the bylaws to address that circumstance. I'm going to refresh my memory as the meeting goes on. And
Okay.
I may comment a little bit
Okay.
further by reading exactly what the rule is from the bylaw.
Okay. All right.
Under
Thank
the
you very much.
circumstances, I think Mr. Clark is fine.
Okay. All right. Well, Bill, you heard it from the source. As you probably are aware, in a situation like this, he is our parliamentarian, and he has the final say of what the rules are, how you construe or construct our bylaws and Robert's rules. So, all right. So
Thank you both.
I think we've got our vote on the minutes. Is that right?
No, we only vote on the motion to amend.
Motion to amend. But Mr. Adams, were you voting no? Is that what you were doing?
Yes, that's what I was doing.
Okay. All right, Madam Clerk, notwithstanding the no, did that motion to amend those minutes pass?
Yes, they did.
All right. So now, Commissioner Powell is correct. We are going to take a vote on the minutes that I described previously, just to refresh your recollection. Those minutes that we are trying to approve tonight are October 27th, November 5th, November 12th, and November 18th, as amended by our motion that was just approved a few minutes ago. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Is there a second?
I'm sorry, Mr. President, that motion's already on the floor, if you recall, before the amendment.
Oh, and then that's right. Then you did at that point move to amend. So let's go ahead and take a vote then on those minutes. All those in favor of those minutes indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
I heard two ayes. Madam Clerk, to support, more important, what you heard. Any
I
opposition?
heard two ayes, but once you call for the opposition, I should be okay to sort it out.
Any opposition?
I have to vote no. I voted no on the other one. I have to vote no. It's a group thing. Yeah.
Okay. Madam Clerk, you've recorded the vote?
Yes.
All right. Next item on the agenda is we have speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, the Board of Education reserves this point in our agenda to make sure that citizens' voices are heard on whatever topic they choose to address to the board. I should warn you that when people speak, we do not generally respond. We want to reserve this opportunity for citizens to speak to the board without the ensuing debate or controversy or even agreement. This is just an opportunity for us to listen. And so I think we have one speaker tonight. Is that right?
That is correct. We have with us Miss Mary Starpoli. She is a parent and she will be addressing us regarding the reopening of schools. Ms. Starpoli, I see that you have your video and your sound on. Please, you have 3 minutes, my apologies, and you may start when you're ready.
Thank you. Wow, I'm the only one. I better make it good. Good evening, members of the board. My name is Mary Starpoli, and I'm an RCSD parent. I am speaking to you tonight to urge you to bring our kids back to school buildings. Continuing with 100% remote learning for the rest of the year is unacceptable. We need from our school board leaders a sense of urgency and an understanding of the irreparable damage that's being done every day as so many kids languish and suffer with no in-person connection and the severe strain that's being placed on our families. Despite the district's best efforts, and I know our administrators and teachers are working so hard to do the best they can, our kids are not okay. They are suffering serious learning loss because of limited instructional time and technical difficulties. The most vulnerable students have been cut off from essential services like meals in school, social and academic supports, and a safe place with caring adults. Remote learning is an isolating experience detrimental to our kids' mental health and social development. I see the negative effect in my own daughter, and I talk to friends who worry about the lasting effect this could have. Our kids have lost the ability to develop friendships, to be with their peers, to experience sports, the arts, and school club activities in their lives. It's gone on too long, and the effect of this is immeasurable. Pediatricians and education policy experts locally and nationally are citing long lists of negative long-term effects of remote learning. Health officials are now saying there's no evidence of significant spread in schools. There is near unanimous agreement by all of these groups of experts that there is more risk and more harm done to kids by not opening schools than there is a health risk in opening schools. RCSD, as you know, is the only district in Monroe County and one of 2 in the entire state of New York that has offered no in-person instruction. The education and opportunity gap between RCSD and surrounding suburbs, which was already one of the widest in the country pre-pandemic, is getting blown open. I understand the district is under severe financial strain, but there's an argument there too with the financial impact of declining enrollment. You can be sure that the longer we go on offering no in-person instruction, the more we're going to continue to bleed students to the private, charter, and suburban districts that are. I understand that the complexity of such a large school district makes it extremely difficult to reopen. But urban districts across the state, including New York City, have found a way, and the RCSD must too. We need transparency. We need a timeline and a plan for safely providing an in-person option as soon as possible for all students, even if it's limited. Even 1 day a week would make a difference. Families who are concerned about health safety can keep the choice of staying remote, but I plead with you to do whatever it takes to open schools for the kids and families that want and need to return. Give us some clarity and some hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Staropoli. President White, that does conclude our speakers for tonight's meeting. We did receive one comment from Michelle Marcajani, and that's a staff member regarding board member behavior. That has been updated on the website for persons to view, and all board members received that written comment for them to review as well via email.
So Madam Clerk, you know what I'm going to ask, and that is, could you help folks or remind folks how they might participate in this process as they just saw Ms. Staropoli participate or provide a written submission?
Yes, persons interested in addressing the board during board meetings may visit us on the website to view that information. You can click on the board tab and all instructions are listed there, but in interest of time, you may also call us at the board office and sign up to speak by noon of the day of the meeting, or you may email us at boardofeducation@rcsdk12.org by noon of the day of the meeting as well, and submit your name for the list. You can also submit comments to that email address as well, and as I said, those comments are posted to our website and also forwarded for board member viewing ahead of the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Wade. I have to apologize. A few weeks ago, the board started a new process, which was to have you provide at the beginning of the meeting an update on upcoming board events, and I neglected to mention that. Do you have something to share with the community about things that are coming up in the Rochester School District?
Well, we recently today, I don't have a PowerPoint tonight because we recently today added an event. We are advising all members of the public that there is another public hearing as it relates to the state monitor's finance and academic plans, and that will take place on November 30th. That is a Monday, which is a different day than our normal board meetings, but this will be Monday, November 30th, and will be at 6 p.m. Persons interested in reviewing those plans may do so by visiting us on the website, and you would just click on the tab for State Monitor Public Hearings, where you may sign up to speak that way. You may also view the plans for your consideration, and you may also input your comment. You may also do that by calling us at the board office, and you may also email us at boardofeducation@rcsdk12.org. So that is November 30th. There will be a second public hearing to review comments and just general perceptions on the academic and financial plan.
Thank you, Ms. Wade. Next item on our agenda are advisory council reports. Just for those who maybe are watching for the first time, the Board of Education has a number of key advisory councils. These are groups of folks who advise the board and the superintendent on a variety of important issues. And we have 3 of them. We have a Student Leadership Congress. Of course, the focus there are young citizens, young students who advise the community and the Board of Education, the superintendent, on important issues relating to education. The Parent Advisory Council. And finally, there is the Bilingual Education Council. We reserve this time, this early time in the meeting, so the board can hear from these various advisory councils. Why don't we begin with the Student Leadership Congress?
Hello, everyone. My name is Anaya Simmons, and I am president of Student Leadership Congress. This is the official report for the Student Leadership Congress's latest meeting on November 18th of 2020. On our agenda, we had introductions, a community check-in, a debrief of the SLC wellness check-in, a legislative discussion, school updates, and an open dialogue. At this meeting, we had representatives from School Without Walls, Rochester Early College International, School of the Arts, World of Inquiry, and Northeast College High School in attendance. During our community check-in, seniors showed their optimism for their graduation, and that's how they are keeping motivated during online learning. Athletes on the call explained how they were hopeful that the district would bring back winter sports and keep close to the same sporting dynamic with competition and coaching. Numerous students said the same feelings about extracurricular activities. Many students on the call expressed their relief for the end of the marking period. Students stressed how vital it was for teachers and administrators to reach out and continue to build connections with students for the success of their online learning. So for our district-wide wellness check-in, on November 4th, we had a district-wide wellness check-in to see how students were responding to online learning. We had support staff such as Rock Restorative and Dr. Koto give us resources for our mental, physical, and emotional well-being that we will be sharing with students who weren't able to make it. We are also able to hear answers and comments from our superintendent, Dr. Meyer-Smalls, and other members of the Board of Education about questions students submitted. For our legislative discussion, Ms. Rahima Wynn from the school board staff joined us to clarify what the legislative agenda works. This agenda will be for members of the Board of Education to discuss and advocate for the allocation of resources for students. After hearing the already proposed plans, students agreed that creating a more culturally relevant reading curriculum, keeping start times consistent with online learning, while cutting down on office hours to add class time, counting more resumes and future building opportunities with schools like internships are assets to our learning experience. For school updates, students conveyed exasperated feelings towards teachers during remote learning. They explained how teachers have been using complex platforms that students have been negatively responding to. We encourage students to talk to their student council representatives and restorative leaders at their school to bring this to the attention of administration to create a resolution for teachers and students. During open dialogue, our Congress brought up the idea to have open flowing schools like what is happening with some colleges in the South, such as Spelman, Morehouse, and Clark Atlanta University. The idea was for schools in close proximity to be able to share academic resources with schools geographically close for students from the schools. This would look like World of Inquiry students walking or getting a ride to School of the Arts to take some of their advanced placement classes, or School of the Arts students walking or getting a ride to World of Inquiry so they can take in-person ASL classes. Students showed their interest for being able to switch locations and create bonds with other students. For this month, we have no comment on any board resolutions. On behalf of the students, thank you.
President White, you are muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Good report. Thank you, Ms. Simmons, for that report. The question I had for you is, wanted to check in, were you able to access the resolutions for tonight, or do you prefer to offer an advisory vote or not?
I have no comment on any of the board's resolutions at this time.
President White?
Did he freeze?
I think so. I think so. We also should be receiving the Bilingual Education Council report. Commissioner LeBron, are you there?
I'm here. I'm
Okay.
about to, let me pull them back up because when I clicked on mute. So I'm reading on behalf of the Bilingual Education Council. Good evening, buenas noches. I'm Mina Gonzalez, the president of the Bilingual Education Council. Thank you for this opportunity to share some of the council's activities. We are bilingual parents, community-based organizations, and educators representing and advocating for the educational rights to a quality bilingual education for our students in the district. The council continues to actively advocate for equity in bilingual education and supporting the needs of our bilingual students and families during the pandemic and virtual learning period. Parents continue to experience issues with MiFi's not working and continue to be a concern that many teachers are not engaging for the full 45 minutes of instruction. They also continue to be overwhelmed by the technology challenges, supporting their children with classwork and just managing day to day, and are expressing a huge need in basic needs and a need of in-home case management supports and services. These issues will get worse the longer students remain out of school. We are also concerned about special education bilingual students and are worried that they are not receiving services as required by their IEP. We are still missing bilingual school BEC representatives as required by the BEC bylaws. We are scheduling our quarterly meetings with the superintendent and deputy superintendent. November 2020, due to the increase of COVID positive cases in our area, we canceled our November BEC and Thanksgiving celebration. Instead, we hosted a successful Thanksgiving basket and coat giveaway. We had over 20 parents drive through and pick up donations. Ms. Martinez will be recording a presentation for the November topics to include special education, graduation, and in-person reopening plans. The presentation will be posted to the BEC Facebook page once completed and available. That concludes our report. Muchas gracias, November 19, 2020.
It doesn't appear that President White is back on with us. 1 second, I see him in the waiting room. Okay. President White? President White? You are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hope you guys weren't waiting for me. Vice President Elliott, did you take over the gavel?
No, but Commissioner LeBron did read the Bilingual Education Council.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Into record. So we can move on after that.
All right, thank you. So apologize for that technical difficulty, but stuff will happen. Anaya, Ms. Simmons, what I was asking when I got cut off was, did you receive the materials in time for me to ask you for an advisory vote on the resolutions, or would you prefer that I not do that?
I would prefer that you would not do that.
Okay, all right. We'll get you at the next meeting. Thank you very much for that excellent report. And in my report, I will indicate I had the opportunity to attend that session that you referred to. It was exceptional. I know people have a lot of concerns about distance learning and the online learning presence, but this district has, through the leadership of our superintendent and Dr. Cotto and Anthony Jordan, has really stepped up to fill in that gap. So I was glad to hear, and I'm glad my colleagues had a chance to hear about that. Okay, so we had the Bilingual Education Council report read, so we didn't miss a beat. The next item on the agenda is the President's report. I'll try to keep it very brief. As you all know, you have access to my calendar. It's still available. I think Francine Scott generates a printout copy for you, but I promised you all that I would provide some brief summary of my calendar. It has some of the stuff that you see on that pretty regularly and frequently, but the highlighted items I'd like to point out to you is I met with Dr. Malik Muhammad. For those of you who don't know, the board is engaged in an ongoing process of continuous improvement, not only in terms of how we measure what the district does, but how we relate to each other. And Dr. Malik Muhammad is a nationally renowned expert on restorative practices and building effective relationships in the corporate and the public service world. We have retained him to assist us in this effort, and from my point of view, it's been remarkable. We've sort of moved to a phase 2 where he's having individual conversations with board members. And again, the focus is here, how can we improve our relationships? Because to the extent that we have a better and more effective relationships with each other, we can more effectively serve the community. Again, I had my one-on-one. I happened to run into Commissioner Malloy. I believe she had a one-on-one with Dr. Malik Muhammad. He has an associate that is working with him as well. And as my colleagues know, they're doing that associate is doing one-on-ones with them as well. And so eventually the goal is to get back together with the superintendent, Dr. Nelms as well, our superintendent East, and have a conversation about, again, improving our relationship with each other so we can more effectively serve the citizens. As you all see on the calendar, there's a number of entries for board candidate interviews. You know how that story was resolved. That effort was resolved with the appointment of Bill Clark today. I was glad to see Mr. Clark get sworn in today, and I hope the community welcomes it as much as I know some of my colleagues and all of my colleagues, and Dr. Myers and Dr. Nelms. I should also tell you that as soon as she heard about the appointment, the mayor was extremely excited and glad to hear about that. Now, I should tell you, anytime we have a situation like that, as a professional courtesy, I do call heads of government and give them a heads up. And I did that with the mayor. I was not able to reach President Scott, but I was able to reach the mayor, and by her text, she was very excited about Bill Clark's appointment. And again, I think it reflects the decades-long service that he has provided this community. And I also noted that our superintendent was quoted, I think it was on WHAM 13's website, saying a number of compliments, offering a number of compliments and remarks about Bill Clark's career. So Bill, as Vice President Elliott said, welcome, and we look forward to working with you. There was also a reference to a meeting that I had with Michael Marsh, someone else who is sort of new, but really not new to Rochester. Mr. Marsh was recently appointed Executive Director of Baden. I was blessed to have a meeting with Mr. Marsh and with Vice President Elliott, who many of you know is on the leadership team over at Baden. It was a good meeting. Vice President Elliott, who was wearing her hat as a Baden leader during that meeting, not as Vice President of the school board, will tell you that we had a good conversation about the past. I happen to have known Mr. Marsh from my time at the DA's office many years ago. And when I had a hairline that just showed a little more hair, I have on the top of my head, and Mr. Marsh's hairline is different too. But we also talked about the future and the possibilities for the school district and Baden to collaborate and partner together, and to have Vice President Elliott over there, and of course, Mr. Marsh, who is very familiar with Rochester, given his years here. I can expect that there will continue to be good things that will happen. And I should note that part of the conversation involves the good things that Baden has done. For example, we would not make, and I think our Ms. Jackson over at number 9 school would agree with this, they would not have been one of only 2 schools in New York State to go from a school under review to a school in good standing were it not for the folks at Baden. And Mr. Marsh and I talked about that and the hope that that would continue. I don't know if Dr. Myers, you've had a chance yet to meet with Mr. Marsh? So I think we can expect through my conversation that relationship will probably continue. Is that right, Superintendent Myers?
Correct. We met for about 45 minutes about a week or so ago.
Yep. And then, thank you. And then in November, you see, I've been having a number of conference calls and discussions with the folks at the Big Five about charter schools, which is always and will continue to be a conversation, a topic. I don't have anything to report at this particular time, but the Big Five is, like many of my colleagues here, all my colleagues here, is concerned about the impact of charter schools. We know what it means for our financial circumstance here in the district. And just the other day, I heard somebody say, I think it was at the public hearing, someone talked about use the word competition. There's much debate about that, and that debate and those conversations will continue, and they continue most importantly at the Big Five. And if there's any update on that, I will share that. As I indicated a few minutes ago in response to Ms. Simmons' report, I did, and I'm pretty sure Superintendent Myers was there as well. I attended the Student Leadership Congress Wellness Check-in. I want to emphasize to my colleagues who maybe did not have an opportunity to attend, I thought it was precedent setting. It was, I don't know that maybe other districts are doing it, but it was really wonderful. And essentially what I got out of it was they were literally just checking in with students, just seeing where they were at, given COVID and the distance learning, the things that you're not able to do when children aren't in the same room with adults. I thought it was a wonderful way to do that. Kudos to Anthony Jordan, Dr. Cotto, Ms. Simmons. Am I leaving anybody out, Superintendent Myers? I probably am.
Crystal Clark, who oversees the school counselors, and also Edna, who oversees our trauma, illness, and grief team.
And thank you. And there's a few other things, but they're on the calendar. And of course, you all know my cell number. Feel free to reach out to me. But to the community, I would say the calendar that I've just described for you probably looks like most of my colleagues' calendars. We all spend a considerable amount of time in the community. And if you would like to see us, we're literally just a text or a phone call or email away. All right, that concludes my report. Next up is, are there any questions? Let me go to the participant screen. I don't see any, and if I'm missing any, please feel free to just verbalize your. All right, if there are none, let's go to the Equity in Student Achievement Committee. Vice President Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. The ESA committee, whose former name was Excellence in Student Achievement, the name now is Equity in Student Achievement, and that recommendation was made from a community member, and it speaks to our focus in everything that we do now around equity. And so it was the thinking that we would also change our name of the committee so that as we move forward with the work that we're going to be doing on the committee, we as the board can keep that in mind, that in every decision from that committee and every recommendation that we're thinking about equity, that is a forefront in our mind. And so having said that, the committee worked on some priorities of what the committee should want to work on for the year. So we did a brainstorming session on September 8th. We came back, I believe the meeting was November 10th, if I'm correct. We came back and we discussed again about prioritizing those particular recommendations or suggestions from our brainstorming session. And so we will finalize, I believe in the next meeting, we will finalize those areas that we feel that we can accomplish within this school year. There are a number of priorities that were brainstormed, but we only could work on so many for this year. So that's what we'll be working on at the next ESA committee to finalize what those priorities will be for our committee. Bessie Hoffa, I want to thank her, the Associate Director of Student Attendance, presented some data for us about student attendance and where we are at this point in terms of our online learning. And we're asking that the committee sees that data on a monthly basis. We want to make sure that our students are really having access and participating in their learning, and they're doing it through this online venue, and that they're actually connecting with the district. So we'll be looking at that data on a monthly basis. Superintendent Myers Small presented some updates on the African American Studies course, which would be an advanced placement course. She provided us with some updates on that. Deputy Superintendent Dr. Janelle Morris provided an update on the use of the data deliverable chart. Once we define that we finalize our priorities, we will use this deliverables chart in order to continue to monitor the progress of those particular priorities. And lastly, the committee convened a work session to review Dr. Shelley Jallo's academic plan. And the next meeting for the Equity and Student Achievement Committee will be January 12th at 5:30. And that concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Just trying to do a number of things at one time. But moving forward, we have a report from our Finance Committee Chair, Commissioner LeBron. I believe you will just do an audio report. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Finance Committee convened on Tuesday, November 17, 2020 as a committee of the whole via Zoom video conferencing. The Finance Committee recommends the approval of the district's unaudited October 2020 financial report, the first quarter student activities fund and elementary activity accounts report for 2021. Can I have a motion now for those reports?
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving the minutes as described by Commissioner LeBron indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Point of order, Mr. President.
Yes, ma'am.
A board member can't vote without being on video. How does
She's not going to vote. She's not going to vote.
But
She's
how
not-
do you even call for a motion if she's not on video? She's effectively not present if she's not on video.
Well, my understanding is, and our clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't speak to Mr. Christoph directly about this, but we anticipated this might be an issue. My understanding is Mr. Christoph said, and Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm getting the second hand, that it would be okay for her to read her report. Calling for the motion, Mr. Christoph, is that an impediment? I know our rules require for voting that we be visual, but can you call for a motion if you're not visual?
Under the relaxed rules portion of Roberts contemplated in Chapter 16, if you believe, Mr. President, that calling for the motion would be appropriate under the circumstances, that would be fine.
Commissioner Powell, I hear you when it comes to voting. There's no doubt about it, but she is calling for a motion. She understands that she cannot and will not vote. And ultimately, it's the act of voting that becomes part of our conduct here as board members. So I would,
that, but from a Roberts rules and a protocols perspective, either a board member is here and fully participating, or they're not. And if they're not going to fully participate with both visuals and voting, then how can they be, how can any part of the conduct of the meeting be conferred upon them, such as temporarily chairing the meeting?
well, she's not temporarily chairing anything at this particular point. She's let me finish. She's just offering up her, because she was at a meeting, and she chaired that meeting of finance. She really is in the best position to describe what happened at that meeting. So the compromise, because I don't want us to get held up here, would be, we have heard her accurately describe, because I was at the meeting and you were as well, describe that meeting and what happened. The compromise will be, I will, or someone else can call for the motion, and then the board members who are present and have their video on will vote. So it's not appropriate for the board chair to call for the motion, but will you do that?
I'll call for the motion.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott.
Vice President Elliott.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Powell. All those in favor of approving the minutes as described by Commissioner LeBron indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition?
Looks like that passes. Kalia, can you confirm so I can continue reading my report?
Certainly, it did pass, and I recorded Mr. Clark as abstaining, Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. The Finance Committee discussions during the October meeting focused on a variety of topics and several discussions were entertained. The Finance Committee conducted a brief resolution review to vet the resolutions with fiscal impact that are slated for consideration in tonight's November 19, 2020 business meeting. CFO Carlene Pierce presented to the board on the state of the district's finances. She noted the budget and revenue expenditure trends provided clarity on the current budget gap and the district's financial forecast. CFO Pierce also shared updated data on the charter school utilization and enrollment. And finally, the committee also discussed the development of a budget transfer policy, Policy 6150, and updates to the fund balance policy, Policy 6500. These policies will be revisited for action in upcoming finance meetings. The next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for December 15th, 2020. And with that, I will be at the meeting, but I will not be participating for the rest of the meeting or voting, as that is my prerogative, and no other board member can dictate to me how I will be present in a meeting. Have a good night, you guys, but I'll be around.
All right, next report would be issued by our own Commissioner Malloy, who is Chair of Governance.
Good evening. Thank you, President White. So the Governance Committee met as a committee of the whole on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. The topics that we discussed during this meeting included a presentation of our superintendent's goals. Superintendent Myers-Small shared her 6 goals for the district: student achievement, accountability, parent and community engagement, healthy youth development, safety and discipline, and diversity, equity, and anti-racism. These goals are closely aligned with the board's goals that were adopted in the October business meeting, and the metrics shared will allow for clear evaluation of these goals by the board. Following the presentation, the board voted to adopt the superintendent's goals. Our evaluations will take place informally in the spring and then formally at the year's end during the board superintendent retreat, utilizing the Super Eval NYSBA recommended tool. A discussion on the board meeting poll results also took place at our meeting from October 2020. The board discussed findings from this poll as it relates to timeliness, board meeting materials, participation, standards of conduct, meeting chair effectiveness, and board impact. We will be having further discussion on the utilization of these poll results in the next governance meeting. Finally, the board was also made aware of the updated communications protocol between district administration and board. And finally, our next governance meeting will be Tuesday, December 1st, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. And that concludes the governance report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. And finally, as Chair of Policy, I'm going to issue this very brief report. The Policy Committee met as a committee of the whole on November the 3rd, 2020. Topics discussed during that meeting included the committee members, the fact the committee members were updated with respect to the status of the Code of Conduct Subcommittee. Additionally, Deputy Superintendent Morris, Dr. Morris, presented proposed policy number 4765 regarding online credit. Committee members voted to advance the proposed policy out of the Policy Committee as an information item. Additionally, General Counsel Carl Christoph provided the New York State School Boards Association policy updates. Specifically, Mr. Christoph focused on the upcoming required changes to the records retention schedule and any necessary updates related to those policies. And finally, board commissioners were updated on the proposed policy manual update. I had suggested that commissioners wait until a new commissioner is appointed to move forward with finalizing a subcommittee structure. On that note, I wanted to offer for the board's consideration tonight a vote. And that vote would consist of appointing William Clark as chair of policy. As you all recall, I agreed as board president to serve as chair of policy as one of our former members declined to accept that chairpersonship. Now that we have the vacancy filled, we have an opportunity to vote tonight to appoint Mr. Clark as chair of policy. That will allow that work to go forward. So what I need at this particular point in this meeting is a motion to appoint. Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Did I see a second from you, Commissioner Malloy? There is a second. All those in favor of appointing Bill Clark as chair of our policy committee indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Mr. Clark, congratulations. You are now chair of our policy committee. And on that note, you are going to be having a lot of contact with one of our many very, very effective employees, Rahima. And at this point in my report, I want to thank her for the work that she has done. Mr. Clark, she's just about as new as you are, but man, she hit the ground running, and she has a lot in store for this committee, and was anxious to see a new chair put in place to begin or to continue on that work. So I look forward to you serving as chair, and I know you will look forward to working with Rahima. She's been a great addition to our team. Our next meeting, I should say, Mr. Clark, your next meeting to chair policy is December the 1st, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. And that concludes my last report as chair of policy. All right, folks. Next item on the agenda, unless there's any questions for me as chair of the policy committee. All right, there being none, we'll next move on to the superintendent reports. Dr. Myers, I understand that you are the only one giving a report today because I think it was some important information that you wanted to share, and I think I understand that Dr. Nelms agreed to surrender his time to you so that you could offer this report tonight.
That he did. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good evening, President White, Vice President Elliott, and board commissioners. I certainly would like to take a moment to welcome, to say this for the first time, Commissioner Clark. I am very much so looking forward to working with you in this capacity. So welcome to the Rochester City School District Board of Education. I do also want to thank Dr. Nelms for deferring his time to me this evening to talk about reopening, and that's the sole focus of my superintendent report tonight. Parents and community members have asked for updates, transparency, timelines, and metrics relative to reopening, and that's my goal tonight, is to share all of those things for how we will move forward in the district. 6 months ago to this very day, I started as Rochester City School District Superintendent, and we were right in the middle of ending the school year, finalizing budget plans, and decisions did need to be made relative to graduation. And moving into the summer, we needed to make decisions relative to reopening. I will go over a timeline that takes us from March until today. But in October, we decided to bring back our students, K-12, students with disabilities, K-12 and specialized services on January 4th. And this decision was the beginning of a phased approach to bring students back. And just as recently as last week, President White asked me about responding to some of the public comments, and I shared that I would be bringing a plan forward. So we know that in our strategic plan, we have a set of core beliefs. And the very first core belief that we have, next slide, please. The very first core belief that we have is that students are our first priority and will drive each decision that we make in the Rochester City School District. And so it's really important to start with that priority to frame the conversation that I'm going to have with the commissioners and the community. So students being the core of our decisions that we make. So let's just quickly take a look at Rochester City School District by the numbers. And I included this information because I've received feedback about, well, what makes Rochester so different? You keep on saying size is one of the decisions to at least initially start remote. We know that we have 56 schools, and programs across the Rochester community. We have a little over 5,100 employees, and we have almost 26,000 students, pre-K through 12, and this includes students in CBOs, community-based organizations. So if we just look at the fact that if we were fully in person, we would need to test each week 1,034 employees, and 20% of our student population would be almost 5,200 students that we would need to test. So again, just to provide context around the needs that we have, or just some of the unique needs. So our students are larger than many of the districts across Monroe County. That 20% is larger than many districts across the county. We also know that last week our chief financial officer shared with us that if we just had a 5% projected cut in state aid, that would give us a deficit of almost $75.5 million. So let's go through the timeline. March 13th, 2020 was the last day of in-person instruction in the Rochester City School District. I was working at the State Education Department when we were made aware of this happening in Rochester and Monroe County, and then across the state. And so Rochester City School District needed to quickly pivot, and this is a term that we've been using quite a bit, but we had to quickly pivot to determine how are we going to provide instruction online? How are we going to continue to feed our students? How would we continue to support students through various mediums and their families? About a month later, 3 through 8 state assessments were canceled. So one of the ways that we measure proficiency of students in ELA, in mathematics, but also science, those state assessments were canceled. In May, again, 6 months ago from today, I was appointed as the superintendent and really needed to hit the ground running to tie up loose ends and to move us forward into the 2021 school year. We also found out in May that June and August 2020 Regents exams would be canceled, and we received an outline of how we needed to proceed given that those exams would not be offered. And so that had an impact certainly on our seniors and any student taking Regents exams in middle or high school. We had over the summer, we were moving forward to try and determine what plan would we submit to the New York State Education Department, because all school districts across the state were required to do so. And so we submitted a plan that discussed hybrid, but in August, after looking at many factors, which I've shared over time, we decided to start school in a full remote learning model, and the other 4 of the 5 big school districts followed suit shortly afterwards. As Ms. Starpoli said, however, Buffalo and Rochester continue to remain in remote learning status. In October, I updated the board and the community that we were going to begin offering hybrid instruction on January 4th, 2021 to students who receive specialized services, students who have IEPs with disabilities. And so the planning has begun to make those arrangements. And then we also discovered and were made aware that in November that the January 2021 Regents exams were canceled. So Dr. Morris and her team have been working to move forward to implement the expectations relative to that. So I have received a lot of information, both formally and informally, through email, through texts, through surveys. So again, starting with making sure that students are first, our students completed a survey, and whereas parents and staff had trepidation about returning to some type of in-person learning, our students overwhelmingly said, we want to come back, we're interested in coming back, we're excited about the possibility of coming back. I shared that Deputy Superintendent Melody Martinez, Chief of Schools, Sheila Webster, we were in the focus group with the students, and I have to say that they were so positive, they were so encouraging, and they really said, you know, we trust that you're gonna make the right decision, you can do this, we know that you have difficult journey ahead, but we look forward to hearing what you have to share, but we also believe in you. And so I carry that with me moving forward. I have heard from numerous parents and caregivers in the district and outside of the district. I've heard the full gamut of everything from Dr. Myers-Small, please, school needs to be open, my child needs to attend school, to all the way to the other end. I'm not sending my child to school, I don't feel it's safe, and then everything in between. So I've received many messages about the desire of, or their perspective on what school should look like in Rochester. Similarly, I've received much feedback from staff, and again, the full gamut, to everything like, please, I value my life. I'm very nervous about teaching in person or working in person, to we really need to have our students back in classrooms. I miss my elementary, I miss my middle school, I miss my PE class, etc. Our unions have been giving me information as well, and there's varied information about what they would like to see as far as in-person, hybrid, or remaining remote. The New York State Education Department has reached out to say, we need to hear what are your next steps as far as what does the rest of the school year look like. And you know that I'm in regular and constant communication with the commissioner and deputy and the assistant commissioners, my former colleagues. The community has been very vocal, and you've heard some of that through public comment, or you've heard it through emails, or just in the neighborhoods that you live in, or your own affinity groups and your affiliations. So the community, again, has wide and varied perspectives on reopening or not to reopen in person. Lots and many conversations with Big Five superintendents. So again, just to recap, New York City in order of size, New York City, which just went back to remote learning, Buffalo, which remains in remote learning, Rochester, Syracuse, and Yonkers. So I regularly speak with my colleagues about plans and what they're doing. And then the Council of Great City Schools. So those are the largest school districts across the United States. And many of the larger school districts are remote. They've tried to open up. Some have been successful. Others have had to switch to remote learning. But most recently, I've been really in close conversation and communication with the medical experts. And Ms. Starpoli and others have quoted the research. And I've had many meetings to hear from them. And they've said things like, you know, we don't even know what the final outcomes, we won't know for years to come the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on our children and our scholars. I've met with many pediatricians who provide direct medical support to our students, not just across the county, but our students. And I've talked to infectious disease medical doctors, and they actually met with not only with me, but with our union leadership. And they shared information about schools right now are the safest place for students to be, and that the infection rates are very low. And I believe as of yesterday, there were only 9 cases that required hospitalization across the county, and that the infection rates are very low. Our colleagues across Monroe County have started testing because we are in the yellow zone, and many schools are reporting that no positive tests are coming back. So lots of information. So again, a cacophony of responses and feedback and suggestions of next steps for me. So let's talk about what are the options. On the left, you see the green circle, and that's what we've approved as of right now, a hybrid model for students with disabilities and specialized services K-12. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. Another option is to certainly move to providing a hybrid model for all students, pre-K through 12, and what that would look like. I would like to propose that and share that with the Board of Education. Or we can remain remote for general and special education students, pre-K through 12. Those are our options. So we have moved forward with reopening on January 4th, 2021. And I just have to stop right here and share a big thank you to certainly the Office of Special Education, to our principals who have students in these specialized programs and their staff. They have worked tirelessly at nights and on weekends to not only make the phone calls, but to do the scheduling and to make sure that when our students in this group come back, that it is smooth and that it is it's meaningful and that it works for students. So this has been, I just have to really pause to say that. But with reopening, right now we have about 352 out of 800 students who have chosen this option, or families have chosen this option. This is in grades K through 12. That represents about 44% of the population of students. We also in this model know that the appropriate specialized services staff will report in person. It's only 352 students, so under this approved schedule, we'll have students at Edison, school number 28, and school number 45. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But all other students pre-K 12 will remain remote. Let's talk about what the proposal is. And I'm looking at this in phases. And so I'm going to take my time through this and really make sure that I try and explain this as clearly. You saw previously that I said January 4th, 2021, specialized services. But if we look at all three phases, which is what I'm proposing that we move forward, we would need to make a few shifts relative to that January 4th start. So in phase 1, it's still K-12 specialized programs, but students in those programs who attend schools that serve K-8, they would attend their home school, except for East and Franklin Lower students. 7-12 students in specialized programs would attend Edison, so that includes East and Franklin Lower, but then all other students pre-K through 12 would remain remote. The next phase is to bring students back pre-K through 6, general education and special education. And why I say the third quarter and I don't say, February 1st, which is when the third quarter starts, is because there's some decision-making points that I'll share on the next slide that could shift a little bit. There are lots of things that we need to do in order to make this become a reality. And so that's why I'm not giving specific dates. It's not that I don't have some things in mind, but I want to make sure that we need to get started, and we could get started as early as tomorrow as putting these plans in place. But that'll be very clear very shortly. So 7-12 students in special education programs would remain at Edison, and 7-12 regular ed would remain remote. Then phase 3 would be, at this point, all of our students. So, but we would phase in 7-12 general and special education. Hybrid students, including specialized services, then would attend their home school. You see down at the bottom, we do have to provide the option for families and students to have a 100% remote option. So that does have to remain intact. So what are some of the, and let me just share this, board commissioners, please take a look at this, because I'm going to come back and I want you to give me some feedback about this. So we'll come back to this, and the same identical information will come back in a few slides further down, because I really want to make sure that we have a good dialogue and conversation. So what are the decision-making factors? Because people are always asking, well, what are your metrics? What's going to determine how you decide to come back? Certainly, first and foremost are the precautionary zones. We're right now in yellow, and there's been a lot of media report that we could go to orange or red in Monroe County, and to the west of us, they are in the orange zone. But these precautionary zones right now have very specific expectations and rules of engagement, and schools have specific rules of engagement. So in the yellow zone, as I shared earlier, 20%, if you are if you're hybrid or in person, 20% of those students and staff must give consent to be tested at school. Now, my understanding is that some districts have also shared the option, if there are other places that students or staff want to go, that they can do that, but schools have to offer the testing. So we have to continue to monitor that. I know that Dr. Mendoza has been petitioning that if we go to orange, if Monroe County goes to orange, that schools remain open, but there are more intensive requirements and expectations in the orange and certainly the red zone. Another important decision-making point is how many students are going to choose to come into a hybrid model, right? Just as the Office of Special Education worked with principals and their staff of those schools, we now need to know how many of the rest of our student population wants to come back. And we know that that number could really fluctuate across the district. In some instances, it could be very low or it could be very high. So we need to know how many students want to participate in hybrid and how many students want to remain remote, because that number then triggers the staffing of who we're going to need to come into the schools. And I know Commissioner Malloy is teaching in a hybrid model in another district. And so there are nuances that are involved with that. And so as far as developing schedules and things of that nature, so it does take some, we will need to know who the students are, so then we can determine what the staffing will look like.
Dr. Meyer-Small, not to interrupt, sorry, but also I do hybrid and remote. So
right. Okay. So we have to figure out, right? Figure out what that is once we know the students. We also, because of we're in the yellow zone, or even if we go back out of that, I believe it's called the green or the blue zone, we still need nurses in our buildings, not only to attend to the day-to-day needs, medical needs, but also because of the testing. And if students or staff have symptoms, we need to make sure. So we need to hire nurses back in our respective schools that are open. We also, through the Office of Human Resources, need to take a look at the medical exemptions, the underlying medical conditions that our staff have. And that process is run through the Office of Human Resources under the leadership of Dr. Miller. But we also may have mandated quarantine when we are in hybrid that we'll have to look at. So that could impact, especially if it happens with our drivers. Wheatland Child Life, for example, has gone remote because of transportation, and they can't transport the children to school. So these are all decision-making factors. Again, things that we have to take into consideration. PPE, once we know the students and staff who will be in, I've been working with Mike Schmidt, who oversees operations, but then we'll need to know how much of each of these will it take by each month to make sure that we are providing the adequate resources and equipment, masks, cloth, paper, the shields, the gloves, etc. So we'll want to make sure that each month we have the proper resource allocation for that. Implementation guidelines of making sure, again, we're going to have to revisit the reopening plans and making sure that each school is has that clearly articulated. So our school chiefs, our deputy superintendents will need to work with our principals to make sure that those guidelines are clear. But just also things like if a student comes in without a mask, then what? What do we do? So those are all things we will need to work out. And again, we have many more buildings and many more students. Not saying that it's difficult, but these are all things that we have to take into consideration. As Commissioner Malloy stated, we've got to look at instructional delivery models. Again, depending on, you know, in a perfect world, you know, if 25% of our students are remote, we could bring them in Monday, Tuesday. The other 25% come in Thursday, Friday, maintaining the Wednesday for asynchronous, but then 50% of the class is remote. How are we going to do that? Some districts have just a solely remote teacher. So we're going to need to make sure that we're working with our families to know that even though Commissioner Malloy is an amazing social studies teacher, if she has an underlying medical condition, she might not be able to report. She won't be able to report to in-person if she goes through that medical exemption. So those are all details that we'll need to work out. And again, that's driven by student and staffing numbers. We'll have to work on transportation and making sure that the routing is done, and that takes time. And so we are really needing parents, should we move in this direction, we're gonna have to have parents tell us, what is it that you're deciding to do? Because our students heavily do rely on transportation. I've talked about the COVID-19 testing materials, resources, and people. I'll go into a little more depth. Then we do have to talk about the funding and what this is going to cost, as well as the state monitor recommendation. So let's go to that next slide and get a little more in depth with that. So as far as COVID-19, we need to determine the availability of testing within schools, because districts are approaching this from either they're testing 20% at each school, or they're taking an overall district approach to test the 20%. We also need to really advocate. I'm going to ask for needs for having free sites within the city for our students and for our staff. We're going to need to get permission from parents because they have to get consent. We've got to set up the testing opportunities. And then hopefully if we're still in yellow, we'll only have to do one round of the state regulation testing. We also, when we talk about the contact tracing, we've got to make sure that our staff complete fully the daily health questionnaire that allows us to do the contact tracing. Then when we talk about funding, our CFO told us that we have a projected deficit right now, if it's 5%, of $75.5 million. And this isn't a manufactured crisis. And really to say otherwise, in my opinion, is irresponsible. We want to really be careful about the narrative that we're putting out there to really not cause confusion. If we are saying that our core belief is that we put students first, then that's what we need to do above sometimes adult needs. And I don't mean to sound pejorative, but we really, our students have told us very definitively, we want to come back to school. And I feel the very same way. The other immediate item for consideration is the state monitor recommendations. Dr. Jallo. We spent last week going one by one those recommendations, and for the most part, you all agreed to those recommendations as far as aligning our resources. So while we're bringing students back, we also have to look at how we are aligning those resources and moving forward with those recommendations, both in the academic plan as well as the fiscal plan. And, you know, she's talked about the declining enrollment, that we have to assess our digital footprint and we have to review our staffing. So it's not just internally as far as the Rochester City School District. I'm asking really externally, what are some of our needs? What are things that we need help with? The Board of Education commissioners, we need to continue to advocate for equitable state funding, right? That's a non-negotiable, and working on that, working on moving forward. We also do have to move forward with implementing Dr. Jallo's recommendations with fidelity in both of those plans. With parents and caregivers, we need you to, if we move forward with the hybrid model, K-12, we need you to communicate your preference. When the principals and other staff are reaching out, we need you to tell us, here's what I want my son Sean to do. I want him to participate in hybrid, or I want him to remain remote. We also need, for parents and caregivers, if we are in the hybrid situation, we need you to help us get your child or children ready for in-person learning, and participate in the daily health screening. The community, we need help because our staff are going to be reporting back into school, and they have they've been out of they've been in a remote environment. Rather, we need you to advocate or daycare providers to provide reasonable childcare options for our staff. And then staff, again, to reiterate, we need the daily health screening. And if you if you haven't already, to complete the medical accommodation reform. You see in that orange box at the bottom, this is what we need for everybody, all 4 of those groups to do. We need advocacy for funding and additional test sites in the city. That's going to be critical for us. We need everyone to do their part. Thanksgiving is next week, if you celebrate that. And we know that now we're supposed to limit ourselves to 10 or less gathering, but we need for our community, our parents, our staff, our Board of Education to do their part as far as the social distancing and the masking. When we look at the data, and Dr. Nelms and I have been in many meetings where it's been shared with us that it's the adults that are really driving in their 20s that are driving up these numbers or the percentages. And we know that this week and next week, many of our college students are going to be coming home, and they will be home for a while. And we know that SUNY schools, for example, they're not returning until I think around February. So we need everybody to do their part and really make sure that schools are the priority and that we don't go into the orange or the red zone. And then finally, as far as needs, I'm pleading, we need people to be patient and we need them to be flexible. We are entering this journey later than our Monroe County colleagues. So they've been through some hiccups and some bumps as they've moved into hybrid model. We're going to experience those hiccups and bumps, and we're going to need everyone to be patient and flexible and know that there are things that we are going to have to work out. So this is where I really need to hear from the Board of Education, right? I've shared my desire is to bring students back who want to come back in a hybrid model. But I can't really make this decision alone or in a vacuum. I need to know what the board is thinking, what their response is to what I've just outlined. Because really, this decision moving forward, the board and the superintendent need to be in lockstep. We can't really be on differing opinions on this. We need to be on the same page. And so I do appreciate Ms. Staropoli and other families that have come forward, either in board comment or the emails to express their need and their desire. But what is important for me and my team to know is, do you support the proposed pre-K hybrid implementation timeline? Why or why not? Because I'm proposing that we move forward with the 3-pronged approach, but there is so much work that needs to be done, as I mentioned, with those decision-making factors of hiring staff and making sure we know how many students, et cetera. So if you would go to the next slide, this is what I'm asking. What are your thoughts on the pre-K hybrid implementation timeline, outlining these 3 phases of K-12 specialized programs starting January 4th, pre-K through 6 general education and special education in phase 2, and then bringing back all students who elect whom their families elect them to come back. And what I think would be important, I'd like to hear, I'm asking for all board commissioners and Commissioner Clark, I know you're new, but it would be helpful to hear your input as well. But again, starting with students first, Anaya, I would ask as a representative to the board, do you mind sharing your thoughts first before the adults go on what your thoughts are on this timeline?
Yes, so my thoughts on the timeline are pretty positive. I think it's safe. I think it really shows the students that you're valuing their safety because this is still a national pandemic that hasn't been confirmed with a vaccine yet. I know a lot of students are still struggling with this and have been for almost a year now. And just the abuse, the emotional or physical abuse that students may be facing now should also be taken into consideration. And if this is passed, this timeline is passed, there needs to be some sort of outlet that students can go to, whether that be extracurriculars, whether that be sports, whether that be just making sure that schools have to bring kids to a certain rec center or something to see them in person, that they get some sort of in-person communication if they're not in the hybrid model.
Thank you. And I'm asking for all commissioners to give feedback. I'm good at wait time too.
Yes, Superintendent Myers, I see that a number of people have raised their hand. I see
Great.
Commissioner Powell, Commissioner Adams, and Commissioner Malloy.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Powell?
Thank you for opening the door to our feedback. I've been kind of waiting for this moment. A number of issues are of concern to me. Contact tracing right now is the big, huge thing in my mind, partly because the governor put that on us. It occurs to me that the president-elect, Biden, has an idea of bringing in almost a CCC kind of workforce to help with contact tracing. And that would be huge in terms of number one, taking the burden off of local school districts financially to pay for people to do contact tracing. But the other thing is, I've recently listened to a radio interview of college students who had been hired by the colleges to support contact tracing on campus, when cases were found on campus. And the dilemma that they face is that their peers know when they have sort of violated the health standards and gone out into the community to parties larger than 10, 15, 25. And they are not honest with the contact tracers about where they've been, about who they've been in contact with, before and after those gatherings. And so until the community standard of conduct is complete transparency, the quality of contact tracing will be at risk. If we can believe the evidence that we have so far, that our students age 14 and under tend not to be affected by COVID very harshly, the big concern isn't the students so much as would opening the classrooms become the conduit for COVID to transmit from the parent of one child to the student, to another student, into another household. Would it, would COVID travel from family through the child to the teacher, and then the teacher on to others? That seems to me the more, the higher risk. And I, for one, don't relish the idea of the district being responsible for keeping the chain of disease communication going until such time as contact tracing has proved to be really reliable. And we'll know that better after Thanksgiving, after the influx of college-age kids come, you know, returning to their home communities, and how well contact tracing and COVID suppression can be managed, you know, after that big transition of people in and out of the communities across state lines and so on. So those are my big concerns. As parents have said, it seems like the evidence is that our students are not particularly vulnerable. But I was in a writers group with a woman who had done an extraordinary amount of research on the Spanish flu in advance of the 100-year anniversary of the Spanish flu in Rochester. And, you know, I probably knew more about the process of pandemic flow through communities than most people did through contact with her research. And I'm very nervous about what will happen if we are not able to break the chain of disease communication. And I don't feel comfortable being part of the chain of communication, even when parents agree that, even when parents want this for their child, their wanting it is not going to stop the potential spread to other families.
So Commissioner Powell, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm not sure, is that an endorsement of saying you're comfortable, or are you comfortable remaining remote? I don't want to extrapolate wrong.
Right now, it would be fair to say that I would be more in favor of remaining remote until data comes in from you know, from what happens with college student movement for Thanksgiving and Christmas. You know, I know that we're planning on starting for special ed kids on January 4th, but I would be very nervous about starting anything before fourth quarter, fourth marking period for general population, unless there was a clear breakthrough. Vaccines, or a clear breakthrough in the way contact tracing is done, which we cannot do adequately because we don't have the manpower to do it. So it's essentially an endorsement of remote learning.
Okay. One of the things that I do want to share, thank you, Commissioner Powell, for your feedback, is that I mentioned that I'm working and talking quite a bit with several medical doctors. They've agreed to come and talk to the board in the next week or so. We're working to finalize that. So I just wanted to also share that, but thank you. I can't see the hands, President White, so
Yeah, Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, good evening to the community. The first thing I need to say as representing me, I just looked on my phone and it was 373 new cases today. That is a concern for me, but I'm not here as a board member just representing me. I'm representing my kids and other kids that I've talked to, and all of them want to go back to school. Every single, I've not met it. I don't know any kids that are happy right now. Some are making it happen, but very few I know are pleased with the situation. What I do know also is that, you know, and I respect the voice of the youth. So I'm probably going to go with what my kids are talking about, even though it's against what I really think. And my wife is a research nurse, so she's really, and we're really concerned about these numbers. But I do respect the kids. And when it comes time to voting, I'm going to be respecting probably the youth's voice. But I also would like us to, as a community, participate. I'm talking to the families in these surveys of what choices we're going to make in regards to this, so that we can have some legitimate numbers. So we'll have real community input. Is very important. Only thing different this third quarter phase, this 7 to 12 thing, is I would like for us to consider something special for the seniors for their senior year. They need transition to help them move on. And I don't think it's real feasible remotely for them. So I just would like for us to prioritize something for the seniors, be it for the exams or just getting ready for college. But in the end, I'm gonna back you, Dr. Myers. I'm gonna back you. So there you have it.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams.
Commissioner Malloy.
Well, I just want to say a couple of my questions have already been answered just through the presentation and what other people have said. You know, obviously we all know that what our kids really need is to be back in school full time with their teachers, getting that quality instruction. And so we're all doing, you know, the best that we can. I want to commend you, Dr. Myers-Small, for your decision, the hard decision that you had to make back in the summer to go fully remote. And I think that given the circumstances, that was the best decision at the time. And I respect that decision. I also know, though, that our kids need access to their teachers. Some kids are just fine in the remote setting, but then other kids not so much. And many of our students need access to extracurricular activities like their sports and et cetera, like their peers in suburban communities. And so many of our students are suffering right now. So I respect your prior decision to go fully remote, but I have to say that I want to tell you now that I fully support this plan that you're putting in place this evening. I'm assuming that third quarter, that is what, mid-March that we're talking?
Actually, third quarter, the halfway point through the school year is January 29th. Mm-hmm. So third quarter is anytime after February, around February 1st. And why I didn't, you know, I didn't put dates because, again, those decision-making factors could fluctuate us. And so we would have some more solid dates shortly once we knew, you know, where we were.
Okay, so this isn't the end of third quarter, it's for the beginning of third quarter.
It's okay. During third quarter, yep.
Perfect. All right, so I guess I have 3 quick questions that maybe can't be answered now, perhaps too specific, but I guess my worry just as an educator is the continuity of instruction for our hybrid students. As a teacher who teaches both remote students, remote sections, as well as hybrid sections, I have noticed that my remote students are getting really great quality instruction as much as can be expected in a remote setting because they see me more often. Whereas in terms of my own hybrid students, it's like an every other day thing, and the continuity of instruction is really broken up, and it can be very discombobulating to both families and to teachers. So I don't know if you can speak to perhaps in a little more specific way what the format for that might look like, if we're going to do maybe a week on, week off, or perhaps 2 days. I'm just saying, or what I'm trying to express here is that if we go 1 day on, 1 day off, that can be very hard for students and families and to keep track of. So if you could speak on that briefly, I'd appreciate it.
I can. We are looking at back to what we had submitted in the summer, a Monday, Tuesday, and then 3 days either Wednesday would remain the asynchronous day, and remote, and then Thursday, Friday would be remote, and then the other students. Here's where the difficulty is. Until we know how many students, we may have Miss Malloy's class, all the students want to go remote, or all the students want to come in. So we're looking at if it's pretty equitable, right? Or what the numbers are that we would do 2 days on, 3 days remote. So Monday, Tuesday, you're in a set of students, and then 3 days would be remote. And then the other set of students, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're remote, and Thursday, Friday, you come in. But that's why I'm saying those instructional delivery models are going to be important under the decision making, because a lot of this is predicated on how many students want to come back and how many don't.
Right. And so I guess that leads me to just another question, which perhaps it kind of is related to this. How might this affect course choices? Because if we're, we've gone through the year with students who have chosen AP courses at the secondary level or other types of electives, are they still going to be able to be offered remotely as well as in a hybrid model if students choose? Or are we going to have to make those tough decisions about, if you want to continue this particular AP course, you will have to go to the fully hybrid model instead. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
It does. And again, we have to look at, that's why parents getting back to us quickly, parents and caregivers, then we can start making some of those other decisions. But the goal is not to, not be able to offer courses, but it's hard to say at this point.
All right, thank you. And then my final question is just, can we afford to do this? Can we afford to offer both remote and hybrid given our financial circumstances? Is this feasible? Are we going to be incurring more debt?
So what I'd like to do is, I was prepared for that question, is I'd like to get through the commissioners' questions, and then we'll circle back, because Mike, much of the cost falls under Mike's responsibility, and he can give us some initial numbers. And basically what I asked him to do was, given that right now 44% of our students with disabilities in those specialized programs, I had them base it on 50% of our students saying that they wanted to participate. So if you don't mind, let's get through, and then we can give the financial
Thank you, Dr.
component. Yep.
Next, we had Commissioner LeBron.
Yeah, so a couple of things I did want to jump on. I was not going to participate tonight in conversation, but I do think that this is so critically important, especially given the fact that I'm a parent as well. So I do want to speak from a parent hat first, and then from the board member, because sometimes for me, those two roles do conflict, unfortunately. As a parent, I absolutely hate remote learning, although I want to recognize every single chance I can that my daughter has some wonderful, amazing teachers at School 15. So shout out to my daughter's 4th grade team at School 15. They have just been amazing, both in communicating with parents and touching base and putting together packets, and just above and beyond. And I know that they have their own struggles as they're trying to manage all of their kids and all of these sections and in and out, and even gym virtually. Like my daughter's gym teacher makes them do physical activity over virtual learning. And even with all of those great things that they're doing, it is still a struggle for virtual learning for my 4th grader. And it's a struggle for me as a parent to manage that while I'm trying to also work and provide supports to her and find childcare when I need to find childcare because I may have a meeting or a place to be outside of the home during a particular time. And so these are real challenges that I know many parents are facing. And so I hate virtual learning, and I wish we could go right back right now and have some form of hybrid model, like right now, tomorrow, today. I would be interested, Leslie, and I know you said you're holding off on dates on these phases, but I do think that the sooner we can start putting out even a temporary date or an idea of the date for these quarters, that it would allow families to have some time to look at these dates and also co-align them with their own schedules.
I agree.
Because if I have a fourth grader and I'm trying to find childcare Monday through Friday, and now I'm trying to find childcare for just 2 days a week, will my childcare center allow me to only do 2 days versus 3? So I think these are things that parents should have as much information up front as soon as possible. And again, even if it's just a tentative date and more to come, but that we are constantly communicating any updates and those changes in those dates. So that's me speaking as a parent. Now, as a board member, I've taken the last 2 days, actually. I had my fellowship conference with my other board members from across the states. And I can tell you that this is, COVID-19 certainly has been impactful across the United States. I can share that I've done my own research on this, that over 1 million children in the United States have been diagnosed with COVID. And I know that we are constantly having this conversation that sometimes feels like it's centered around the adults that work in the district. And certainly we should be concerned for their health as well. But my concern is still with the kids. And I know that this is impactful on them in the social emotionally portion of it and the academic portion of it. But on the fact that over 1 million children in the United States have been diagnosed with COVID, and the fact that we actually do not know what the long-term health implications will be on children who get COVID and survive. And we often have this conversation really framed around catching COVID and people passing away, which is terrible and very much so possible with other factors. But not enough conversation is had that if a child gets COVID and recovers from COVID, that they will have no long-term health implications. And we don't have enough data at this point in this pandemic to make that claim. And I personally, as a board member, would feel irresponsible to say we should open up tomorrow and expose kids to the potential of long-term impacts of COVID. And so again, it's not to minimize the real concern and health risk for our staff, because absolutely that is there too. But again, as a board member, I do support your plan. I just would like you to have some tentative dates for families, and that this type of presentation or conversation is had at every board business meeting. In December, we'll address it again and see where we're at, that we are addressing it again in January. And if the tentative dates are changing, where we're at, because obviously we do have to look at the cases here in Monroe County. And there is an increase every single day. And we are at like this needle point of moving over from yellow to orange, and shutting down restaurants and gyms and other places again. So, and obviously Thanksgiving will determine a lot of what Christmas is going to look like in December for COVID. And so with that, I support it with greater communication to families and a little bit better clarity around the tentative dates for the phases. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I will start by saying I do support the reopening plan, the hybrid plan, because I feel that at this point in time, we really need to begin to address the learning loss due to remote learning. And also, when I look at the plan, I notice that you're offering the students, the parents and the students, 100% option whether they want to opt into a hybrid model or continue remote learning. And I'm sure that we're also offering accommodations for the faculty and staff, those with medical conditions that would be at risk should have the accommodation so that they, would not be exposed. And so I would say I support moving forward. I think overall it's the best direction that we can move in as a district. And I'm sure that you checked with the local colleges and universities, and they have, you know, various testing methods that they're using to make sure that COVID is not present in the buildings. And, you know, with the right tests and the right accommodations, I think this is the way to go.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark.
Superintendent Myers, I would agree with much of what my colleagues have said, and would only add that I think it was Commissioner Adams that talked about, and others may have as well, talked about the need for surveys to constantly check in with parents, with employees, and with students, as you had previously, perhaps using a similar survey or some kind of tool to check in where they're at, so that, you know, if someone does opt to remain remote, you have some sense of predictability based on the survey. Because I think I heard you say you really don't know, and you don't, but maybe surveys would help you prepare for that. I also agree with the observation. I think at least 2 board members discussed the need for dates. I, like you, have heard concerned parents speak at board meetings and say, just let us know what we can expect. It's not like they necessarily want to have it one way or the other, but I think many parents just want to know what to expect and to be informed about that. And I think this plan, which if I haven't been very clear, I support. But what I like about it too is it begins to construct for our parents what the future looks like. I think the ambiguity of COVID just generally, and the necessary ambiguity, because it's hard to construct a plan to put in front of people, has people really anxious. And I think to this extent, you may relieve some of that anxiety by laying out what, at best, what you predict will be available to them. And I think that will be very helpful, because I've heard that a lot. People just want to know what to expect, and I appreciate the effort in that regard. To the extent that you can put dates on this, that I think would be very helpful. One of the first things that I wondered, because I, as you know, my kids went to the district K through 12, but that was many years ago. So 3rd quarter doesn't mentally connect with me.
Yes.
I know it does for some of our parents. I know Commissioner Malloy, Commissioner Powell, Commissioner LeBron, Commissioner Adams. We have lots of parents. My kids did go K through 12, but it's been a while. I know they can probably connect with this, but it was good to hear you say February, early February. That really was very helpful to me, because now I know that it's really not that far off where, you know, we might be able to have our students back and it goes without saying, everybody wants students, everybody sees the academic and health related benefits of students being back in the classroom. It's a matter of, and I won't describe the underlying reasons behind it, but I agree with a lot of my colleagues that talk about, you know, the vulnerability of our children and what the long-term impacts could be. And the fact is, the data, the research tells us that children of color and families that live in dense living environments and who have to take public transportation are more vulnerable to this vicious COVID. So I do think this plan is wise, as it cautiously tries to get us back to where we all want our children to be. And then I will just add, and this has nothing to do with the plan, when people try to make comparisons between the suburbs and the city, I just got to say, quite honestly, I think it's apples to melons. It's just not a fair comparison. And I know that their hearts are in the right place when they say, well, what about equity? What about learning loss? I get it. I do understand that. But we also have to look at the data that talks about the vulnerability of urban children and their families to this deadly, and let me repeat, deadly disease. And while my children aren't in school any longer, I'm still a parent. And you never lose that desire to protect your children. And by the way, that's not just something that parents have. public servants have it too. So don't, to those that would judge us for, you know, going with the online learning and cautiously making our way back into the classroom with the hybrid model. Don't judge us. These are people, these are leaders, these are parents, these are staff members. And this is to the young people, because I know they want to go back. I think Commissioner Adams is absolutely right, and that they want to go back. My youngest is in her junior year of college, so she's still pretty young, and she wants to go back. I get it. But at the same time, as parents and as leaders, we're responsible for their welfare and their safety. And so we're doing our best. And so I would just encourage people, don't judge, but be helpful, be supportive. When you get a survey, respond. If you see something wrong, if there's something you disagree with, you've heard our clerk say on multiple occasions, come to a board meeting, speak up, provide your input, tell us where we're wrong. Become part of the solution. But I to your question, I think this is a reasonable plan, and I hope and pray that you'll be able to implement it with fidelity. But again, I will caution people. We really don't know what the future holds. I mean, people were talking about, I think the other day, somebody said, look at New York City, they're bigger than us, and but I heard I don't know if he made the decision to close the schools there, but they're very close to closing schools in New York City.
They have.
So, and I think somebody just said the other day, well, look at New York City. Sure, if New York City can open up, why can't Rochester? And you were, I think, quick to point out Buffalo has taken the same approach we have. Everybody's different, but everybody's the same insofar as they're doing their best under these unprecedented set of circumstances to protect children and yet still provide them the education that they are entitled to. And I think this plan does that. Thank you. Let me go back to the participant screen, see if I missed anybody. It looks like Commissioner LeBron. Is that an old hand or is that a new one?
Nope, that's a new hand. Actually, I just wanted to make sure I cited my source so that if anybody's watching, they can go and read the American Academy of Pediatrics and Children's Hospital Association did a collaboration. So this is their report. They reported 1 million children as of November 12th who have been who have tested positive for COVID. There are also hospitalization numbers on there, death rates in children. And again, people tend to focus that only on the adults, but children are really being impacted by COVID health-wise. So if anybody wants to go look at that, it is the Children and COVID-19 state level data report. And it tells you which states have reported. New York State is one of the states that has reported. And I just wanted to cite that source. So if anybody's interested in understanding where that 1 million children positive with COVID came from.
Thank you, Commissioner Vaughn. Vice President Elliott.
Yes, I've sort of waited until last because really, I don't want our children to go back to school under any circumstance until, you know, we have moved through this this pandemic. You know, in our communities, we're more vulnerable, and to have our children to be around other people who may have contracted COVID unknowingly, and then taking that back to our families, it just puts us in an even more disproportionate position, given a lot of the health issues that our community currently has. I understand that, you know, people are ready to, particularly students, are ready to go back. They want to be with their friends. But in many instances, you know, they don't know the information that many of us know, and that we're the adults, and we have to be the ones to make the decisions. And sometimes those decisions are hard, that they are difficult. And so I don't want to allow our students to put us in a position that we're making a political decision, as opposed to us being the mothers and the fathers that we need to be, you know, for our children. There are times when parents have to say no. And in my view, this is one of those times that we have to say that we should say no. I'm not convinced that even in February, the reason being we've got the New York City schools that are closing, we've got universities that are closing, that are doing online. We've got some of our own neighboring districts that are online, and so I just rather err on the side of caution and continue in the remote environment. I don't want any child themselves to be hospitalized with this, number one. And number two, that we have a parent or a family member, a grandparent that is contracts this and then they die. I'm just, and I'll have to say to you all, I'm just pretty emotional about this. I just don't want us to have to bury anyone. That's just where I am. And I know that the data may say one thing, but as I said, I'm looking at this for the fact that, I work in this community. Even at my organization, we're looking at now going, if it goes to a level orange, we're looking at, working 3 days from home, and so I'd prefer to be safe than sorry. So, I know other people have different perspectives on this, but that's just my position. I just do not want us to compromise our students nor our family. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. I appreciate your feedback. Mike, do you mind coming on screen and just giving a high-level view of what it looks like as far as cost?
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Myers-Smalls, for the opportunity. I would be remiss before I start a couple of comments, just to recognize our team that is leading all these operational divisions across since March 16th through, all kinds of difficult circumstances, and that certainly is Tom Casa, Matt Seeger, Joe Griffin, Stacy Darby from facilities, Wayne Kittleberger, Stephanie Morrell from transportation, Bandale Akine and David Brown from food service, Jim Shepard and Dan Betancourt, and Chuck Cutler from our safety and security department, and then everyone behind the scenes, Mary Ross, Diane Campoli, and Rhonda Kirkland. And as I go through these comments tonight, it took a full team effort to put into this. So I want to make sure people recognize that they show up every day since March 16th and are really actually putting students first, which I think is we should be commending them whenever we have a chance to. What we tried to do tonight is just be able to express a little bit in regards to the financial implications in regards to operations, and how we arrived at this number is currently we have a very minimal operational footprint across the district in terms of what's going on in our buildings, the number of students we're currently transporting, the number of students that are participating in our food distribution, students and families, excuse me, and then our need for providing some level of safety and security at our buildings. So when I outline the costs for these different phases, it is kind of above what if we were going to stay in remote for the rest of the year, this would be in a sense an additional cost, and I'll try to outline that as we go through this. The other area that I'm going to continue to refer to is in our food service department. I know the board made a very difficult decision early in October to lay off a large number of our food service and student and security employees. What it did is it brought our food service since October 16th into a situation where it was we were running now cost neutral as opposed to earlier in a significant deficit, mainly because the number of meals could not offset the number of personnel that were working. So when I reflect here on a projected deficit, it's the idea of bringing more people back to serve students we have significantly less students in the building at all these particular times. So the first phase is when we refer, as Dr. Myers-Smalls referred to, is bringing back our students with disabilities in a very minimal footprint. We're looking at 3 buildings, and we just basically projected that from January 4th to June 30th. And that cost us just a little bit over $1.3 million And I have a bit of background by department, but I think that gives you a sense. Because it's only 3 buildings, our facility requirements are certainly less. And when I talk about facilities, I'm also referring to all the any type of personal, any type of PPE, any other supplies, the requirements for cleaning, and all those different pieces we kind of built into an overarching number. I also don't want anyone to misinterpret the fact that we are not prepared to open. We are by all means prepared to open in any one of these phases. It's just that sustainability over the course of 90 days, which inherently it becomes the cost of ownership. So like I said, the first phase with their students with disabilities through 3 buildings, just a little over 1.3 million. We also did an analysis based upon bringing our students with disabilities back and moving them to, instead of bringing them back to their home schools. And the reason why the difference between the 3 buildings versus their home schools was because it minimizes transitions. If we're going to bring back our elementary children sometime later in the winter, at the end of first quarter, let's say, we don't want to move our students with disabilities into just 3 buildings and then turn around a few weeks later and then move them back to a number of buildings. We wouldn't gain any efficiencies by doing that. We'd increase student transitions, and certainly there are other ancillary costs in regards to moving teachers and that type of thing. So that obviously is a much larger expense because you are now taking on 14 buildings versus 3, and you are feeding the same number of children in a larger number of buildings. So your lack of efficiency certainly is much more limited. Our transportation costs basically stay neutral, and our costs for student safety would also stay neutral in that. But the overarching cost for that we figure is just about 2.5 million versus the 1.3 for the 3 buildings. What was described as the second phase now, so the first phase was our students with disabilities, and I gave you the 2 different scenarios there. The next scenario would be bringing back our students K through 6, and these would be all of the students with disabilities, as well as all of our regular education students. So it's kind of a combination of our group that we described earlier in the first phase, and then bringing every other child in pre-K to 6. The numbers here certainly dramatically increase. We go from anywhere between 3 to 30, now 32 buildings. Certainly significantly increasing the number of students in that type of hybrid model. The transportation cost certainly dramatically goes up, mainly because of social distancing and the requirement that we won't proceed probably to use less buses because we're going to have fewer kids on the buses as we have to provide that required social distancing. So, certainly our food service continues to be not quite as efficient because it requires the same number of people, whether you're serving basically 50 students versus 200 students in terms of meal prep and cleaning up and so forth. And then finally, we would certainly want a larger footprint in terms of student safety. And we're talking here mainly about many of our students with disabilities have elopement plans. So this helps us monitor the halls a little bit better. We also have to be very mindful of the students as they enter the buildings, that we have all the children and adults go through temperature checks. And then we also have the possibility of having to escort children from a classroom to the nurse's office or even to a containment room if they become symptomatic in the building. So there's many others. There's some new requirements on our student safety personnel that we're going to have to look into. And that cost obviously significantly goes up. It's about just a little bit under $18.5 million to bring back our K-6 students. I want to stress that's not money. It's not plus the students with disabilities numbers in the first phase. That's kind of an all-encompassing number.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that number.
Just a little bit under 18.5 million. And then finally, our students in grades 7-12, and what we would include there is obviously the remainder of the buildings, but we have students that are in K-8 buildings, as well as students that are in 7-12. It's an additional 15 buildings. We would be, at that point, we'd be fully operational. Our earlier models, when we talk about cleaning, we would be able to mobilize our custodial force, our custodial personnel, and kind of put them all onto a smaller number of buildings. So it would increase our cleaning and kind of lower our overtime costs. When we now go back to kind of our standard custodial personnel, in order to maintain that safe, disinfected, clean environment, there's going to be a requirement for additional time for these staff members to go and perform that task. Certainly our burn through in terms of our PPE and any other type of equipment that we would be using would be increased. a very simple item like our wrist, our temperature check devices, which are a student who put their wrist under that device, you know, that would be, we'd want to kind of mirror what we do in terms of our screenings and coming into the building. So we're going to need several more of those devices to bring in, you know, several hundred students into any particular school, especially at that time of the year when it's obviously very cold outside. We want to get the kids in as soon as we can. Our transportation cost, and we kind of figured into it once again an abbreviated, less amount of time than the elementary. It would just be a shade under $5 million. And then our food service, once again, we're trying to do a reasonable projection, and so I think that our deficit would continue to increase as a result of that. And you know, not for lack of effort, and certainly not for you know, we'll try to be as creative as we can in terms of delivering that. But on the other hand, we want, you know, our kids are in school. We want to give them, you know, the hot meals that we've done traditionally across the board, and then certainly some additional safety personnel to kind of monitor that, and as we would normally do in our schools. The cost for that would be about just a shade under $7 million, and that would be in addition to the earlier cost of the K-6. It's not as pure as 18 plus 7, 25 million, because it kind of depends on when each one of these groups start, and that number could certainly oscillate. I think to have the most conservative case scenario would be about a $25 million price tag. And I want to stress, that's normally how we would do business. I mean, that's when we talk about how we normally budget in operations, that, you know, we're not really going beyond that per se, but it is a very stark difference to what we've been expending in the first part of the year when we've been completely remote. And that was actually very beneficial to us, as our CFO pointed out, Carlene Pierce, on Tuesday, in terms of being able to set aside about $13 million. Many of that was from operational, the lack of less operational expenditures during the first quarter and a half of our academic year. So our purpose here was really to just paint a very realistic picture. I would not have anybody hang their hat, particularly on any one of these numbers, because we don't have a solidified number of students. We don't have the solidified number of students that will be actually eating in any of these particular buildings, and so on and so forth. And when we get those numbers firmed up at all these different phase levels, then we can certainly provide some much more detailed work. But I thought, you know, we thought it was important for you to have this piece of information as you reflect and deliberate on what the next steps are for us. My last thought, though, is I really want to stress that the team has worked tirelessly. There is no shortage of PPE. We have had it deployed in every single building in preparation for the start of whatever our academic restart would be. And so I really cannot emphasize that enough, and that includes all facets of it, everything from our filtration systems to new bottle filling stations, to the temperature check devices, our screening device for staff and students, and so on and so forth. So it's much more than just masks and face shields and the desk separators. It's far reaching in terms of trying to maintain every semblance of safety that we possibly can do for our students and staff. And with that, I'll conclude my comments.
Commissioner Malloy, did you have a question?
I just had a couple questions about, you know, there were a lot of numbers being thrown around, and I'm a very visual person, and so I really need to see what those numbers are aligning to. It was hard to process all the information so quickly. So it would be helpful if you could maybe follow up by giving us this presentation somehow. I know that numbers are going to change, but knowing where those numbers are aligned with in what areas would be very helpful for me. I was trying to take copious notes as I went along, and it was just a little difficult. Like you were mentioning, 18 million at one point, and then 1.3 million. And so I just need to see it clearly outlined. Thank you.
You know, well, I think, you know, as Dr. Myers-Small said, we'll have many opportunities to provide a much more detailed plan. We've really thought at a high level right now, but I can quickly go back through the four numbers, the four overarching numbers for everyone.
Great. I think one question I had was the 1.3 million that you had mentioned. I wanted to know if you could just, and forgive my ignorance here, but so when we're talking about that first number that you threw out for phase one, 1.3 million, So is that in addition to our current deficit that we have, we're adding to 1.3 million to our deficit then, or, and forgive my ignorance, but if you could explain.
No, no, not at all. Let me do the four numbers first so that we have a kind of a baseline here. Once again, the first number with the 1.3 million was for our special education students returning to 3 buildings. The second number, which was, scroll down to my paper here. Let me for a minute. The second number was 2.5 million, and that was for the same number of students, but returning to 14 buildings. So those are both considered phase 1 in 2 different scenarios. Our phase 2, as Dr. Marsma outlined, would be our K-6 students returning. That was the $18 million number. So we'll just say it's about 18.4 million plus or minus. And then the additional money for our students in 712 would be just under, we'll project it just under $7 million. So those are the 4 numbers to kind of take and put aside, and they could certainly change as we kind of verify that. In terms of if it doesn't add to our deficit, I think it kind of depends on how we're projecting to, cover some of the financial information that Carlene shared on Tuesday. If we're identifying savings in terms of operations and other areas to close that gap, then they would not be available to us in order to do that. If there's other strategies that can offset that, then it's kind of becomes how we're going to need to do this in order to bring our children back. So without having all the different financial information in front of me, it would not be fair to kind of comment any further whether it increases or decreases. But it would be fair to say that any operational projected savings for the second half of the school year would not be possible for bringing students back. And that's not a value adjustment on that. That's just
$7 million that you mentioned was for phase 3. Just
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I missed the last question.
Last number that you gave us was $7 million. Was that for the 3rd quarter phase 3?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So Mike, quick question, or Leslie. So let's just take that number that Commissioner Malloy just mentioned, $7 million for 7-12. Now we obviously budgeted money for 7-12 for the 2021 school year. So my question is that $7 million on top of what we already budgeted for COVID-related reentry services and support? Is that what that is? Or is that just the $7 million that we had allocated already in the budget for 2021? I'm trying to get a sense as to whether these numbers that you're giving, like 18.4 million for phase 2 for K through 6, is that on top of what we allocated already in our budget for 2021 because of COVID-related expenses, or is that just what it would cost?
It's what it would cost, but from what I'm understanding, because we've been in a remote, environment, we don't have those costs anymore, so we have to add them back in. Correct, Mike?
That is correct. Yes.
But again, as I say, steal Amy's line, excuse me for my ignorance, but we never took them out. In other words, no one made a budget amendment for 2021 saying we weren't going to spend for the education of kids K through 12. We last year, or whenever we did the budget, we passed a budget that would provide for the education of children K through 12. I don't know what that actual dollar amount was, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out is that I assume that money is still there. And I guess then if you were just sort of listening to this presentation, you would think that money, 18.4 million for K through 6 and 7 million for 7 through 12 would be money that we already allocated. Or alternatively, another way to read this presentation is that's money that would need to be spent for the extra security, for the people that are needed to take temperatures and all the COVID related stuff. I'm just trying to get a sense if that, let's say 17 and 18 million and 7 million is 25 million. Isn't that money already there?
So the answer to that would be, so we, currently spending, and I tried to say that at the beginning, maybe I wasn't clear enough, I apologize. So what we try to do is articulate the delta between what we are currently spending in these 4 departments and the increase it would be from our current state to bring back these different groups of students. So I don't want to misrepresent the fact that it's I'm going to say, I want to make sure I say my answer articulately here. It's not like we have to go find $18 million, but it's a much different number than we're currently spending at these particular buildings for services.
I get it, and I appreciate. I know that was totally unintentional, but I think the clarity is important. It's important that people understand that money has been set aside, that we have probably, it appears, been saving money because we've not had to spend according to what we originally projected. But this 25 million for phase 2 isn't money that is not already there. Is that a correct characterization? That money was budgeted when we passed the budget for 2021, right?
Dr. Myers-Small, may I speak up?
Yes.
Okay, so President White, if you take a look at the amendment that's going through tonight, the budget amendment.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you're looking at the decrease of expenditures there on within the general fund, and this is general fund only because in Mike's world, he's dealing both with the food service fund as well as the general fund. So there's a crossover there. But you'll see on that amendment that there's actually a utility savings of 1.3 million. There's also a, that includes facilities overtime and rentals and that type of thing. So again, we just have to be cautious because if we're pulling it out as a savings in one place and then we're going to go ahead and expend it now, we have to be very careful that the projections that we're using are going to remain in alignment with what we're putting forth in the budget amendment. Does that help? So yes, the money was there, but in that amendment that we're passing, that money was being pulled out of some of those codes and put to other expenditures that needed to be covered.
Well, it's a separate conversation, I would think, but naturally, because we haven't had the utilities on, we haven't used security guards that we've had to use, we've laid paraprofessionals off and so forth, there have been some savings. I understand that. And I would be the first to say, let's not start spending those savings because at any point in time, we could end up going back into business full time, which is right. So I get that. But what I was just trying to clarify is, and I appreciate, Mike, your effort to do that with me, that the $25 million that we're talking about, people need to understand that's not money that we're going to go into the red or money that we need COVID's 2 for. I'm sorry, not CARES Act 2 for. That money is already in our bank account. We allotted money to provide for the education of children K through 12. Now we've been saving some money, but I'm not talking about that. And I saving money through utilities and so forth. But that money, nobody's touched that money, correct? That money is there. If you were to do this, implement, let's say phase 2 today, we would have that money, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I just don't want people to think that we're going to go into the hole to implement this plan.
Well, part of this though is, don't forget, depending on the number of students that we have, we're making assumptions that we're at 50%, right? But if we had 100%, remember, we have to observe the guidelines on the buses. That could change this amount. Like, that's why we need to know. It's hard to talk about the exact finances until we really know. That's why, like, tomorrow, we got to get started knowing how many students come back, because in the spirit of transparency, we do need to keep on coming back and updating the board and saying, here's where we are. And this is what we're seeing, and again, depending on the numbers of students and staff, we need to make sure with the PPE, you know, I talked to Mike about that and making sure that every month we have that. So what, you know, I would like to do, what we need to do is we need to continue to circle back to update you on where we are with numbers, both as far as the numbers of students, but also where we are financially with this. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that we you know, we've got some other structural deficit pieces.
And I apologize, colleagues, just if you allow me just to ask one more question.